Hi, this is Dr. Mary Balliet. I am the co-founder and chief science officer of Potential Power Nutrition. And my guest today for our YouTube channel is Tommy Vane. And the purpose of this is actually to answer the question, what is the deal with Gen Z? So who is Tommy Vane? He is the assistant director of student government and organizations at the University of Buffalo, where he oversees student government, university clubs and organizations, programming, recognition, student development, leadership, education and development, student involvement. And he has been studying and presenting on Gen Z since 2019. So, Tommy, what would you like to say to add to that?
I think you hit the nail on the head with that one. Thank you, Dr. Mary.
You're welcome. Well, we're so honored to have you. You and I have known each other for quite a while, and we both really love students and love being in academia, even though now I'm retired. And so I think as we are trying to explain to everyone who is not a Gen Z and has maybe an opinion about Gen Z, we want to really focus on that today so that we all are kind of on the same page. So the first thing I want to ask, besides saying thank you, is describe your journey, Tommy. What made you get to be where you are? Like, how did you get to be the assistant director at the large state university of New York?
Yeah. It started as a student. I didn't plan on going to study higher education, but through my time at UB, I had a great support system of staff who helped me. I worked at actually the office that I work at now. I worked at as a student and had some incredible mentors. I originally had planned on going for psychology to be a therapist, and then I realized that I don't think I could handle talking to people about their problems for 40 hours a week. So I pivoted my career and went into higher education and student affairs to work with college students. So I studied higher education administration, and just working with students in student development theory. So I did 2 years of grad school for that, and then worked at some smaller institutions and smaller private institutions, community college, and eventually built a portfolio around student engagement, leadership, diversity education, and student involvement, where the position here opened up to work with clubs or student government and be part of a student engagement team. And I had to take it. I'm surrounded by great people, great students here, uh, really engaged students, really active students. It's just a really good place to be for me right now.
Wow, that's great. So this our topic is Gen Z. So what years encompass the Gen Z? Like, who are they?
So, Lindsay, the dates aren't necessarily hard and fast. Like there isn't like a council that states that come January 1st, 1996, you are now Gen Z. But the general rule is that Generation Z was born between 1996 and 2010,
And
putting them and 2010, putting them between 14 and 28. So it's a pretty wide gap, a wide breadth of development for those individuals. And not only does that have to do with the years being a part of Gen Z, but a big component is the cultural experiences of that generation. So for millennials, a big cultural experience that made up the millennial generation was being young during 9/11. So being between 5 and in college during 9/11. So having that pivotal moment and watching that shape our generation. So for Gen Z, it's a variety of things, but the general age right now for Gen Z is 14 to 28.
wow, that's really interesting. And so, what should we know about their ideals and values? Because as you're saying, they weren't even here for 9/11.
Not many of them. So 9/11 to them is a moment of history. Um, I anticipate 9/11 will go the way similar to like Pearl Harbor State, where
Uh-huh.
just history will fade out the memory of 9/11, at least the solid date of 9/11, not the experience of what happened. But a lot has happened in their lifetime to shape their ideals and values. So specifically in their childhood, they've experienced the aftermath of 9/11, so the response to 9/11, where we also have to remember that 9/11 happened in 2001. However, year after year after year, on television and in other media and in person, we would have things that say like, we'll always remember or never forget. So although some of them may not have been present or born for 9/11, they still had the echoes of 9/11 throughout their childhood. They've also had the 2008 financial crisis. That was a huge impact on them, their views on finance and wealth and accumulating funds. So they are big savers. They're not necessarily financially savvy or have a lot of financial training on what to do with the money, but they are the biggest savers of all the generations. So the crisis really had an impact. They weren't impacted, their bank accounts weren't impacted necessarily directly, but they watched as things looked different for their families. Maybe holidays looked different, or maybe a parent or a family member was home more, or they moved from a house to an apartment, or became a multi-generational household. Uh, Climate change was also big and shapes their values. So do the school shootings and gun violence debates, among many other things. So this generation, in terms of their overall values, they want security. Security is incredibly important for them, both physical security, and financial security. So that sense of well-being.
Well, that's very interesting because now, as you're saying, the 14-year-olds, the very end of that generation is about, they're at the beginning of high school. But now we have this whole group in their early to mid to late 20s entering either grad school or the workforce. And so that's a really interesting time to be in grad school when you've had this very different experience compared probably particularly to faculty. And so that's got to have an impact at a college for like just what about for the people who are teaching? And they have that now they're going to have these high schoolers, college, grad students. What's that going to be like?
It's interesting because how what's impacted their childhoods. So the major events. And keep in mind, we have COVID-19 is a major event. Those are students who may not have had a high school graduation or a prom or pivotal life moments that we as a culture cherish. Um, so they are uh, struggling with that sense of security, but also they're a very interconnected, interwoven generation, very connected to each other. They have a lot of compassion, empathy, loyalty, to the point where they get compassion fatigue because they can constantly see what's happening on the news, whether they want to or not. Previous generations would turn on the news to learn what's happening or open a newspaper. Here, this generation can swipe left on their phone and be delivered the news, or just click on a web page and have access to the news. The news is around all the time, and they can easily see not only what's happening locally, but what's happening across the nation and across the world. So it's very easy to see the kind of catastrophes that are happening, but also to connect with those people, because those people you can communicate with now. You can talk to people across the world and learn from their experiences and read about what's happening and watch videos too, because I think we have to also remember that watching a video has a stronger connection to that occurrence than maybe reading about it firsthand or secondhand. So this is an empathic generation that often gets compassion fatigue because they are so connected to each other. And they're a generation that wants to help. They're big helpers. They want to achieve things on a global level. They want to fix things on a global level because they're aware of what's happening on a global level. So they're more connected to finding the root cause of an issue than maybe doing some work that could maybe help for a day or assist in the short term.
That's so interesting. So then what about this group now? They're entering the workforce. Some straight out of high school, very not as many, I think, as used to be. Most people doing something else, but now they are entering the workforce. And what kind of work are they even looking for? What do they want to be, so to speak?
So it varies, but there's some common themes. So a big theme with Gen Z is the idea of making a difference. They want to make the world a better place, but not in necessarily an idealistic way that maybe a millennial would, but in a pragmatic, realistic way. So they are actively involved in causes. And again, they'd rather find solutions to a larger problem than volunteering. They might want to work to solve hunger and figure out how to work with hunger at a city level than maybe volunteer at a soup kitchen. They want to act where the problem is no longer a problem. They're also highly entrepreneurial. They have a very high entrepreneurial spirit. So they witnessed what happened to their families when they relied on companies and businesses to provide a paycheck for them and the downfall of what occurred. So they have this entrepreneurial spirit and drive, not only to make the world better, but to do something actively in it through uh, business or an exchange of the goods and services in exchange for making the world a better place, helping solve an issue. And with the internet, it's a lot easier to be an entrepreneur now. So there are sites that you can basically sell anything. There's a lot of opportunities and avenues to run a business, whether it be something, small like driving Uber for a bit, but then eventually building up to a lot of them, about 40% of them want to start their own company at some point.
Really, 40%.
Yep.
So is that a good thing? A lot of people who I'm involved with Potential Power are healthcare providers or, with gyms or acupuncturists. So is this a group that would be attracted to that then? Because a lot of those people are actually in their own business.
I think so. And I think this generation can understand that any kind of field or path can involve starting your own business. Maybe someone who is a dance major right now and is graduating will eventually someday know that they'll want to open a dance studio and teach dance and run a dance business. So they may not be pursuing it actively now, but they may know that in the future they'll want to do something in regards to entrepreneur. And you don't need to be a business major to be connected to business.
That is really interesting because I think that there is a group that are older where they wanted to go to work where they did feel secure. But what you're saying is they're like, well, it's a risk to own a business, but it's a risk to have a job because you don't know if that company is even going to be around. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Yeah, yeah, they can't necessarily rely on other people to make their money. So a lot of them have side hustles. A lot of them have side hustles. It's a big thing. And it's easier to have side hustles nowadays, whether it's um, DJing or selling things on Etsy or doing, again, Uber Eats. These gig uh, jobs are easier to get, and they eventually lead to further opportunities when it comes to entrepreneurship because they know about networking and connecting with others to build a brand for themselves, but also to set themselves up to be successful in the future through a variety of different skills that they can obtain.
Wow, that's really interesting because I know that of the doctors and the healthcare providers and the owners of the gyms and that health coaches, nutritionists that tend to follow me on my YouTube channel, they're maybe looking to hire someone who's gonna get out of school with one of these degrees that is in a healthcare thing. What will it take for them to help that Gen Z person be successful in their small business, which is the majority of people who might watch this? Like they have small businesses, now they want to hire this recent graduate. How are they going to help that person be successful in their office? The lawyers, the doctors.
That's a good question. A lot of it, I think, we underplay the idea of mentorship. I think a lot of young people nowadays that are coming out of college or coming into the workforce are looking for a lot of things out of a person. So a kind of a holistic experience. Gen Z nowadays is looking for not just a supervisor, but a mentor, sometimes a therapist, sometimes um, an older sibling or that kind of role or aspiration, someone who they can connect with when it comes to something like a small business to build and learn from, to take their knowledge and their wisdom. So a lot of it comes down to the relationship between the company or the management and the employee or Gen Z. So I think at the core, they need to have appropriate technology and communication tools, access to things like Wi-Fi at all times of the internet, but connecting with them because they are a very educated generation. They're the most educated generation right now. So they have an appreciation for learning, but they also, because of the way that their lives and have been set up in the education system, they have an appreciation for order and structure. So they like knowing what they're getting into before they get into it. They like to know what the expectations are. They value practical career choices that will help them financially in the future. They're also a self-confident group. So they come in with a sense of confidence that other generations haven't had before. They feel like they can achieve things, that they can see themselves in the shoes of uh, their employer. They want to be able to do well. They're very hardworking. They're an aspirational generation. Um, they're connected. They are willing to go above and beyond. And with that, they are loyal. So although their loyalty is earned though. So building that relationship with them, treating them as human, I think Gen Z through the pandemic, especially, but also watching what's happened through their childhoods, have seen the importance of humanity when it comes to being people, and they bring that to work.
That's so interesting to hear that. I think that one of the things when we talked a little bit ahead of time, when we're talking about like you're going to bring someone on and you're maybe thinking that they're going to be ready to hit the ground running, right? Like, oh, I can put them to this job and they're just going to be able to do it. That is not exactly what you felt would be a successful way to have someone. What is it that you would give advice to? I'm going to hire someone. What should I expect that my job's going to be?
Though I think we underestimate um, the experience that Gen Z has. About 50% of them have not had, like, did not work in high school. So maybe they worked in college or have had their first job in college. I know in our experience, we're hiring a lot of students now to do jobs that they do not have previous work experience to prepare them for. Um, Even something like answering the phone for someone else. Because keep in mind, they've always just answered the phone for themselves. Whenever they've had a phone call, it's for them. So that idea of transferring the phone or putting it on hold or the etiquette that comes with that is not something that they've had before. So it's training them on how to do that. I think we undermine training a little bit, or we forget how important expectations are and setting up those expectations ahead of time, especially, with new employees, regardless of generation. I think new employees need, good onboarding and clear expectations. But for this generation, whether it's stress or time or if their time is flexible, so flexibility is a priority for them. Um, a lot of them believe that if they're getting their work done, they don't need to have strict regulations in place as to when they start or finish their work. So it's important to emphasize, especially when working in a team, if you're a small group, when you're in a team environment of a workplace, that some colleagues may be relying on them to have in sync schedules to be productive together instead of maybe one worker coming at 8:30, but then they're relying on maybe a meeting or a chat or uh, a conversation with someone who's Gen Z, but they might be coming in closer to 10. So there's a gap there. So I think clarifying those expectations ahead of time, being very clear as to what the work environment is like. So letting Gen Z, with their empathy, understand the situation of the work environment, what's needed to get work done, but also not being afraid to explain why. I think having that why, giving them that understanding of why things are the way they are, helps to kind of ground those expectations too.
I find that fascinating. When I think about it, when I was in COVID and I was teaching online, sometimes we had synchronous class, asynchronous class. So people were doing the work whenever they got to it. And I never thought about that compared to when you have to come in and the class is at 8 to 10 and you have to have your butt in the seat. And now that's, people resist, like, well, why, I could get this work done in this environment, maybe not that environment, but certain offices, just like you're saying, have really strict schedules. So you're really saying the onboarding process is really critical.
Yeah, it's crucial.
Crucial. Wow. Um, so uh this is a question I wrote when you and I talk. I wrote, for somebody like me, that sounds like a lot of work. Why is that worth it to me? Why should I do that? Why am I not just going to hire a millennial?
Because there are laws against that. But
That was a good answer.
thank you. Um, I think it's worth putting in the work for Gen Z because you're prepping them to be better workers, right? They're dynamic employees that can meet expectations and they often exceed expectations. So they're incredibly hardworking and they understand that if they hustle when they're young, then they're setting themselves up for a better success in the future. And I think no matter what the generation, like what generation the person is coming from, serving as a mentor or coming at it from a lens of guiding and helping, treating them with empathy will build a rapport that often strengthens productivity, right? I'm reminded of the adage, employees don't leave jobs, they leave supervisors. So
Oh, I know what book that's from, actually. That's from First Break All the Rules.
really,
Yep.
I only know it as that phrase, but I think it's very accurate. I think a lot of people don't leave their jobs, they leave their supervisors. So having uh, being a conscious supervisor and an intentional supervisor can lead to greater success. No matter what that could be. It could be productivity, it could be relationship building, it could be, great output. But all of these things come together. It's convergence of that, of those values to help shape a better employee.
That's really, we're going to go on to the next thing in a second, but I want to come back to this for a moment. I find this particularly fascinating since, I was babysitting when I was a little, when I was a tween, and then you have a job in high school and you have a job in college, and you just like, you feel like you've worked since you're 11, right? And you now to just hear this, that sometimes the very first job they're going to have is after college.
Their parents worked very hard so that they could think about it from the perspective of their parents, of their Gen X parents. They're also co-pilot parents. So they are along with their Gen Z values family more, I would say more than other generations have. They have a strong connection to their family. Because I think Gen X, being latchkey kids, saw what impact that had on their lives. So they've actively shaped their children's lives to have a stronger connection with them, right? Because we're often raising our children, as someone who's not a parent, raising children to have the lives that they didn't. So with Gen Z, also their parents want them to often get into good schools, and that requires things like extracurriculars, soccer practice and games, piano lessons, dance lessons, all of these other activities that strengthen their extracurricular, co-curricular experience makes them a well-rounded person, not to mention studying in academia and tutoring. But often they're not prioritizing jobs like high school employment. Plus, where are they going to find them now? Think about where those high school-esque jobs are, right? The mall, we don't really have many of those anymore. Fast food restaurants, sometimes, but sometimes those jobs need to go to other people who need them full time. So a lot of these part-time jobs that we had growing up don't really exist anymore for them to take.
That is really a very good point, because if you think about it, so many less stores. So instead of having you had your after school job that you worked in a store, or I worked in a newspaper office, actually, there's not those things.
Nope, those are hard to come by now.
Wow, I never even thought about that till this very moment, how really different it is, right? So
Yeah,
that's a very, very different
there's
environment. And so now I'm going to come into kind of a high stakes job without actually having made all my mistakes in a low stake job,
yeah, yeah.
right?
They're
Where,
making
yeah, where if I got fired because whatever, I didn't type fast enough or whatever back in the day. You're like, there's another typing job somewhere else. Totally different.
Yeah, so that's why they are leaning towards jobs that they run themselves, that they um, are influencers. I think older generations can mock or dismiss influencers, but having an online brand, having an online persona and a relationship and getting viewership brings in money. So they're seeing these as the new celebrities, as aspirational goals of building a following and making a difference in that way too, of being your own brand. Because again, they're the way they've grown up, that's what they're used to. That's what they've experienced. Even Gen Alpha, they're not used to things like commercials because oftentimes, like
Right,
parents will pay for subscriptions where you
right.
don't get commercials. So it's from their perspective growing up, there's just not the opportunities that we had to develop these kinds of skills earlier on.
That's fascinating to me. It's some things you don't think about. So, speaking of social media and that they're Instagramming everything, and I can speak as how different life was for me. So, in because I've just recently taught grad school with this group, and when I was the advisor to a club for 30 years, but it's only in the last few years the club has an Instagram account. So how do you navigate that when you go to work when you're like used to like your sports team had an Instagram account and you had an Instagram account, so now how are you going to have an Instagram account for your business? I mean, unless it's your own business, how does
Yeah.
that
So it depends. It's situational. So I think when it comes to Instagram, that's how they connect to each other. That's how they relate. That's how they share experiences. It's like sharing, if you and I were to work together and we were coworkers and we would share an experience maybe after a meeting, the after the meeting,
yes.
or those kinds of experiences. It's like that, except on a to the internet on a global level. So I think if the company values privacy, in a sense, then it should be clear enough the front of those expectations. Again, back to expectations. The I think we can't underestimate how important it is to provide expectations. I supervise students, specifically graduate students, and even with them, I hand them a sheet of working with me. I say on the front, this is working with Tommy. This is who I am as a person. This is the kind of supervisor I am. This is like, these are my personality assessments like DISC and Myers-Briggs to kind of help you get an understanding of who I am. And the back is my list of expectations. And I write them down, I bullet them, and I refer back to them and I go, these are the expectations, just to be clear to know what you're getting into and what I expect from you. Here they are laid out. So if privacy or if something like that, like not being on social media or keeping work and social media life separate is important, be clear about that. Some brands thrive off like the behind the scenes relationship of their staff. Um, as long as the company is sincere and just. So I think of like Bon Appetit. Uh, I don't think a Gen Z employee is going to take a photo of a confidential document or something that should be private and share it on social media. But we need to be mindful that when we when we're used to sharing like a complaint with a coworker, now they can share that same complaint with the internet. So it's just an added layer of just something to be mindful of and to talk with them about and communicate with them about.
Wow, that's really interesting. So on some level, there's an opportunity to have a little bit more, this person goes better in this place because you have more of that organization. That's pretty cool. And my final section here is that I've heard the expression Gen Z is aging like milk. What does that mean?
So poor Gen Z in a way. So I mean, the concept of them looking older than generations did when they were their age. So, comparing photos, it's oftentimes where I've seen photos or I've seen comparisons of um, shows like Cheers or The Golden Girls, where someone of that age now, if we change their hairstyle or if we change their clothing to something more modern, they would look what we would consider to be their age of like 45, 50, etc. But aging like milk comes from a variety of reasons. So I think one, we can't undermine stress here because uh, they've lived through a very stressful childhood, a very connected childhood. Appearances are very important because that's how you can get followers or views. If it's not appearances, then you have to be funny or skilled or something else. But being attractive gives them a leg up. So they're also embracing things like cosmetic surgery, like filler or Botox earlier than necessary, earlier than other generations would have. Also, let's look at things like when looking at generations, so you could basically break it down into cultures, right? So it's the culture of a generation. People are people. Like people will always be people. We're going to have more in common with this generation than we would have differently. But looking at cultural aspects like technology, language, appearance, so dress, um, those are the things those are markers of the generational differences. When we look at Gen Z too, the way that they're dressing now and what is in fashion now is often what I think millennials and later Gen X sees as their parents' outfits. So it could be high white socks. So they're like, oh, that's what my dad wore. Or it could be, I read recently that having your white t-shirt show under a sweater is very chic right now. But back when I was younger, it that was a faux pas. You wanted to avoid that at all costs. You wanted to make sure that whatever you were wearing underneath never showed. So a lot of the things that we would consider older fashion, mullets, for example, are back in.
Mullets are in.
Mullets are in. Come, come to UB and I'll give you a tour and we can count the mullets together. Um, so they're in. A lot of the stuff that we would have considered older are now back, just like fashion cycles and trends. So I think a lot of those people are seeing that at Gen Z, and there's that connection between like, oh, they look older because I associate that appearance with being older. Um,
That's very
but,
interesting. So they are, because I read an article where, they were sheltered, right? And so on some of the everyday skills at home, they're behind,
mhm.
like say doing their laundry or things like that. But now they look older. So does that cause a disconnect? Because now they look older, but they have all this lack of experience that you would expect with someone older.
I think there's assumptions that are being made there. Also, as someone who has worked with and studied college students, none of them know how to do their laundry, and none of them know how to cook popcorn because it's just being 18. So um, oftentimes
Really?
it's at this time that they're learning to do these things. Um, it's it's big that, so many 18-year-olds are doing laundry for the first time. And that's not just a Gen Z thing. That was also a millennial thing, like a young millennial. When I was in grad school or a young professional, we would discuss how students, especially 18-year-olds, didn't know how to do certain things, like their laundry, like cook pasta, like microwave popcorn, and that's why the fire alarm is going off in the residence hall. So some of these things are generational. Other things are literally just being young. And there's I believe it was, I'm going to forget it now. It's a fantastic quote by George Orwell,
Uh-huh.
who who said that every generation thinks that they're more intelligent than the generation before them and wiser than the generation that comes after them. So as a millennial, I can easily say, oh, I'm smarter than Gen X or baby boomers because I know how to convert something to a PDF.
Oh, yeah, that's important.
And and for Gen Z, I'm wiser than Gen Z because here's a throwback. I'm not eating Tide Pods or something. So it's often we look through our own lenses to look at the generations before and after us. But I think with Gen Z, there is that emphasis on appearance and there's emphasis on, they're getting into makeup earlier. Gen Alpha is into makeup right now. Our young 13-year-old, 12-year-old, 10-year-old Gen Alpha being raised by millennials, so getting millennial values, they're learning the importance of brands and the importance of things like skincare is important for 10-year-olds. So they're buying uh, from brands like Drunk Elephant, that is an expensive brand sold at Sephora, because that's a signal of status for them versus Gen Z who cares less about status in that way. They're more grounded. They're more, they're raised by Gen X. They're more pragmatic. They care less about labels. They care more about maybe like, is it 100% cotton or 100% like fiber, like what the fiber count is or percentage. So they're focused on things like that. But also, they wear vintage clothes because money is important to them. So some of them like vintage, but some of them will go and buy vintage because it's good for the environment or it's economical. So they're buying our parents' clothes or our old clothes. And so again, it's that relationship that we're making between what they look like and how they're dressed or how they appear, plus stress from everything happening in their lives. There's a lot of factors that go into them uh, looking older than we would expect them to.
Got it. And I did look up a little bit of data on them. They are big vapors.
Yeah, they are. There's a lot of factors that go into that. So, um, for millennials are still, as of right now, the biggest smokers of like uh, cigarettes and like vapes. But keep in mind the context of everything. Millennials are, 29 to early to mid 40s. Gen Z is still 14. So their entire uh, cohort isn't old enough to buy cigarettes to even state on a survey, that data. So they are vaping more. Brands are catering towards younger audiences with flavored vape pens, which is also impacting appearances. Uh, I think as a generation, Dare worked pretty well on millennials as a whole, where Gen Z is getting less of that. Smoking is more of a status symbol again. So that's also impacting their appearance. They drink less. They tend to drink less than older or previous generations, but smoking is pretty on par with this generation.
I
Um,
find that fascinating.
I know, I know.
Yeah,
We,
I mean, because they care about the environment and they're caring about climate, because of climate change and stuff. So that's very, very fascinating. And so if you wanted to let the group watching this know what is the main thing that I should take if I'm a person who's realizing I may need a new person in my office and to run something to be an employee, they're graduating, or I'm going to accept them to grad school. What of all of this, how would you sum it up? What should I really be paying attention to? What's my job, or what's their job? How am I going to work that out? What would you say?
that's a great question. I would consider new employees an investment. So you
Oh,
pay more upfront to get better returns in the long run. So sometimes with a new hire, with a new employee, especially a young Gen Z employee, it's putting a bit more work up front, helping them be a guide, be a mentor, be someone they can turn to, someone they can trust and rely on, someone who they can listen to, but also someone who will listen to them. I think it's easy to dismiss younger generations because they might not know as much, or may not have experienced as much, but they still have a lot to contribute. This generation is very hardworking. They are very connected. They have a strong sense of empathy. They're very knowledgeable. Again, they're the most educated of the generations. Um, they're very smart, very quick, uh, very up on things. And they are what a lot of cultural experts would say, like the in vogue generation, the young generation who uh, brands are going to, people are going to see what is trending. But as young professionals, I think they're an investment. So you have to put in the work up front, help them, and then it will pay off. They will be able to take what they're learning and run with it. It just takes a bit more time or more work than I think people would expect or assume out of a new worker.
got it. So a lot more mentoring, writing it down, clearing. Can you just say one more time? I really love this this is the thing we probably should put a little thing on this where you said on the front you tell them about yourself, but on the back
Oh yeah.
you have
I
your expectations. Could you just
yeah.
go over that one more time? I think that was really interesting.
Yeah, so I have a document that I made that's a front and back document. On the front is working with Tom. So what they need to know about how I work, the kind of supervisor I am, the kind of colleague I am, the kind of person I am. So I go about like what my job is like, what I'm like as a supervisor, um, like how I work with them, how I supervise them, how I teach them. I go into a bit about my personal life, so there's that relatability too. I go over my personality assessments, like my DISC style, my Myers-Briggs, um, my Enneagram, things that they could look up to learn more about like how I am as a person, like my personality. And then on the back of that, I have a list of expectations. So things like time, things like dress, things like um, communication, uh, things like my no-goes, like um, don't lie to me. I'd rather you tell the truth and we solve a problem together than you try to cover it up and I learn about it later. Or things that keep me informed, like I don't like learning things too late, or I don't like being surprised. I love gifts, but I don't love surprises. So uh, things like I want to know things like up front. Um, Kind of list out those expectations that you would almost think you wouldn't have to list, and then list those because that will help set the tone for the rest of that experience, the rest of their career with you, because then they know what they're getting into, and putting it out on the table for them helps them feel more confident and comfortable because they know, again, they value security. They like to look before they leap. They like to know what they're getting into. Providing them this gives them and shows them what they're getting into. So that helps them build that rapport and feel comfortable and confident in this position.
This is just fabulous. I cannot thank you enough for sharing your very valuable time with us. And, I know you do this for other places. And so thank you for doing this for us. And I'm really grateful to be in relationship with you
Okay.
and stuff. And we did have our expectations written down because
It helps.
we are both that way.
Mhm.
So that was great. All right. Thank you very much. I'm going to end the recording.
Sounds good.
All right, great.